This is Phil with Phil Effects and got another quick tutorial. Today's topic is going to be essentially creating your very first After Effects project. So this is for the Art 184 beginning animation class, and we wanted to have just a brief kind of a tutorial of creating just a very simple project. And so let's go ahead and get started. So on the desktop, you'll see that I've got a folder. This follows the format of creating a project folder that's in the tutorial that's I mentioned in the handouts, and that can be found on my Vimeo site, and the link is in the handouts, and it's setting up an After Effects project folder. So if we open this folder up, you'll see that I've got the template file, which everybody will have. This is the template that we're going to use in the class for creating an After Effects project. I've got an audio folder with an audio track in there. I've got a movie folder, and I've got a movie we're going to use in there. There's some render outputs, and there's some stills that we'll use in our project. So let's go ahead and get started. Let's open up After Effects and let's create a project. So click on After Effects, the splash screen starts up. As I've mentioned before, I'm using After Effects CC 2014. Everybody in the class will be using CS6, although if you have After Effects at home because you've subscribed to CC, you may have CC 2014. The template will work in either. So let's go ahead and let's open a project, and we go to my desktop and the project folder, and here let's open up this template. And if we click on My Comp and right click on there, we can see the composition settings. So here's the settings for all the compositions we'll be using in class. It's a 16:9 or high def aspect ratio, but the size is 720 by 405. This is a big enough project that we can do something nice with this, but it's not so big that the file size, when you render it out, is going to end up being gigabytes. So it's a compromise between having something useful but not generating gobs of data. The frame rate is 29.97, which is what our standard broadcast 30 frames a second. And we start with a default duration of 10 seconds. So let's go ahead and say OK. And we need to add some content now to our project. So one way to do that is you can go up to File, and you can import a file. The quick way that I usually do it is I can either right click here and I can say import file, or actually what I just do is just double click in the project box. So if I double click in the project box, it brings up the Finder, and here because I've accessed this before, it's actually going right to what I want. So here's the audio file I want to use, so let's go ahead and bring that in. I'll just say open, double click again, and the movie file I want to use is this X-Wing movie file. So let's bring that in. Interpreting the footage, this particular movie file has an alpha layer. What the alpha layer does is we have this X-Wing fighter that's flying around, and it's transparent everywhere else. I'll have a training video later on about alpha layers in particular, but for this, the purpose of this exercise, we can just accept it the way it brings in with the defaults. Double click again, and I've got some stills, and we need this Hubble star field. And if I shift click and click the X-Wing PNG, those are the other two stills that we need. So let's go ahead and open those. So now in my composition, we've got a couple of, we've got a JPEG and a PNG, we've got a movie file, and we've got a sound file, and we have a comp. Now, one thing that I like to do is I like to organize things a little bit, and so if you, I like to put my stills in one file and audio files in another folder rather, and my movies in another folder. So I go down here and click on a bin, and I can call this stills, and then I can take my X-Wing and I can click and drag and put that in there. Click and drag and put it in there, and get my Hubble star field, and I can click and drag and put that in there. Then I can create another folder called audio, then I can click and drag my audio file and put that in there, and get another one, and I can call this movies. So notice I'm keeping the same kind of names just like I have in my desktop and for my folders, and it just helps to keep things organized a little bit more. It doesn't seem like much when you've got a project with this few files, but believe me, when you've got a big project and you've got 35 stills and 10 movies and 6 audio files, this project panel can get quite congested. So breaking it down and putting a little sense to it is really pretty nice. Another thing you might want to do, this is a minor point, but I'll bring it out. Notice how the name of the My Comp kind of gets stuck in here, and we have all the other folder names. This basically goes alphabetically. So one trick you can do is if I go in here, and what I did is click on that and then I hit return and that highlights it. If I put an underscore right in front of it, and then I do that with all of these, put an underscore, and then do this, put an underscore. It puts all of the folders on top. So by putting an underscore, the way that this project folder sorts everything is by putting an underscore in front, it puts all the folders on top, and then I can have the compositions below. It's a nit, but again, it kind of helps to keep things organized. So the first project, what we want to do is let's go ahead and we want a background and a foreground, and we're going to do an animation by making the background move against the foreground. So the background and foreground, the background is this Hubble star field, the foreground is this X-wing fighter. So let's drag our star field, and I can either drop it in over here, or if I just put it in the timeline, it automatically centers it. And we can see the size of that star field. This is quite big, this picture is. So you can see the size of the star field versus our comp. That tiny little box there is the size of our composition, and this is the size of the star field. So let's go back to fit up to 100%, and let's take our X-wing fighter and we'll drop that in here. And if we look at the size of the fighter versus the composition size, you can see the size of the comp of the fighter here and the size of our composition. Except, wait a minute, there's a problem here. And the problem is we don't see the fighter. Why don't we see the fighter? Well, After Effects, the layers in After Effects follow the same kind of things that if you work with Illustrator or you work with Photoshop or just about any other composition program. The layer order has to do with the order in which you see things in your composition window. Top to bottom in your layers is front to back in your composition. So if top to bottom, top meaning is front, I have the Hubble star field in front and the X-wing fighter is in the back. Well, that's the reverse of really what we want. We want the Hubble field to be in the background. So I can click on this and just drag it down and put that to the back, and now we see the X-wing fighter. Well, that fighter looks a little bit big for what we want, so we'd probably like to scale that down. Well, there's a couple of different ways we can do that. One, I could click this, and again, I need to see those handles, so we can shrink this down. And I can grab this handle and I can just scale that. Now, if I just grab it and drag it, you can see I'll end up distorting that. If I hold down the Shift key while I drag, then it scales proportionally. So if we look at that, that looks pretty good. So if we fit this back up, that looks pretty good for our composition. So that's one way of doing it. Let me do an undo, take that back. And the other way to scale it is you click this little triangle here, that's called a twirly, and we click down to transform. And these are all of the transform parameters of this X-wing object that I can manipulate. And one of the ones we want to manipulate is scale. Right now we have scale on X and scale on Y. And notice this little lock means that if whatever I scale on one of these, it's going to lock and it's going to scale proportionally. Well, that's exactly what I want. I can click on here and I can just type in a number, but actually the easiest way is when the mouse comes up, you see that little arrow that goes back and forth with the little hand. I just click and drag and I can scale that down. This to me is really the simplest way because I can see things fully in my field of view. So we scale that down to about 48%, and that looks pretty good right there. Okay, the last thing we'd probably like to do, well, the next thing we need to do, excuse me, is we need to animate the Hubble field. We want to animate that background against the foreground. Well, the way we do that is we go in and we grab that position. So again, let me go in and let me scale this back down again. Click on this Hubble field, and I go in and I start to click and drag, and I move that field in the foreground relative to the background. Well, that's how we'd like to animate. And if we click down this twirly and we see transform, here's the position. So let me click up here, and you can see those numbers in position changing as I drag that. So what I'd like to do is really probably start here at time 0, and that's my initial point. And the way that you set keyframes so that you can do an animation is you click on this stopwatch. So we'll click on the stopwatch here, and that's our first keyframe. And then let's make the animation 5 seconds long. So let's drag the playhead out to 5 seconds. And then at 5 seconds, I want to be down in this corner. So let's drag this background till we're down to about right there. And so now you can see over time that star field is going to move, all right? And we can get a better view of that if we take this and zoom back up to fit 100%. And now if we hit preview, we've got the preview panel over here, and if I just hit play, it'll play that through. And we've got a 5-second animation, and it's playing it through. Now notice the playhead keep going. Well, the playhead keeps going because we set our compositions 10 seconds long, and our animation only goes for 5. We can actually fix that. So what we can do is let's right-click on My Comp. I go over here and I right-click on the composition settings. Let's change that 10 to 5. So we change that 10 to 5. Go ahead and say OK. So now our composition is 5 seconds long, and if I hit the preview, it previews through, and then it'll repeat. Our preview is set to be looping, all right? So that looks pretty good. So to make this just a touch more exciting, let's go ahead and add some background music to this. So we have this audio track, this called Itty Bitty 8-Bit, and to give credit to the gentleman that produced that, I got that from Incomtech. This website, the gentleman's got a lot of royalty-free music, and there's just all kinds of music here. And it's done with Creative Commons, and you can use it without paying any royalty. So it's a good place to get some nice audio. So let's take this audio, we'll take it and drag it down and put it in the comp. And there's nothing visual, so there's no eyeballs because you just have music, but you can actually go down here and we can see the waveform, and so here's our waveform. Now audio in After Effects is a little bit tricky. If we want to scrub and be able to hear what the audio is, you need to hold down the Command and Option on a Mac or Control Alt on a Windows machine, and if we do that, it's dragging through, and there is the music. Okay, I'm not sure if that came through, but here, if we hit RAM Preview, and RAM Preview will play the music. Okay, so we have our audio. So that's an animation, and we've got some animated background, a foreground, and we added some music to it. Another animation that I want to do is with including a movie. So let's create a new composition. You can do that. You can go up to File, go up to Composition and hit New Composition or Command N. Or actually, the quickest way to do it is just click on this little movie icon. Bingo! There, it creates a new comp. And let's call this my movie comp, and it's going to be the same parameters. Because I changed the last composition to 5 seconds instead of 10, it picked that up, and it's going to do what my last change was, so it's going to make the comp 5 seconds, which is fine. So let's go ahead and just say OK on that. Here's my movie comp. Now we need a background, so let's get our helpful star field and put that in here. And we're going to need a foreground, and this time we're going to use a movie. And the movie is this X-Wing movie. So we'll take that, and remember I said before, top to bottom, front to back. So the Hubble star field is in the top, so that would be in front. So let me click, and now you can see if I drop that in, now we have the X-Wing fighter in front and the star field in the back. So if I move this, you can just see that, okay? See this coming through? So there's the starfighter. The movie is just a little bit big for the field of view, so maybe we want to scale that just a little bit. So let me get to a frame where I can see that right there. Let's do a transform. Let's scale that in just a little bit. There we can see the starfighter right there. And let's see what that looks like. So there he's going, and he's flying around in the star field. All right. So we've got that scaled, and we've got our foreground, and we've got our background. Now the last thing we want to do is we want to render our comps. So I've got this render queue here, and at the moment this was here. If this wasn't here, if this window was not open, I just closed that. Where would you find that? Well, you go to Window, you go all the way down here. I think it's just off the screen, but at the bottom of the menu there's a tab called Render Queue. So you open that up, and now here's your render queue. So we want to render, first let's render the still composition. So we have my comp. Let me drag that down here. And in terms of the render settings, let's take a look at what those are. The quality is going to be best. Here's the resolution. It's going to be to the size. If you wanted to change the size, this is where you would do it. If you wanted to change the time sampling, this is where you would do it. If you wanted to change the frame rate, this is where you want to do it. And if you wanted to change the length. At the moment, the defaults all are fine. It's going to render to the composition length, which is just under 5 seconds. And the size looks fine. So let's just say OK with that. Notice, even though I didn't change anything, After Effects thinks I did, so it says this is custom. Under Output Module, we're going to use QuickTime. If we didn't want QuickTime, we could change that. So here's your different kind of selections for your output format. Post-render, there's nothing we need to do post-render. The channels are RGB, and the depth is millions of colors. Audio output on CS6 with After Effects CC, it automatically detects that there's audio, all right? And so it will either render the audio out or not. On After Effects CC, this is one thing, I don't have the panel here, but since we do have audio, you will need to click in here and say render audio, and the default is not. So if you don't click that, you'll render your project and you'll say, you know, Phil, what happened? I don't have any sound. Well, you don't have any sound because in the output module, you needed to click in here on CS6 to say that you wanted that sound on the output. So we'll just say OK. And then we went to output to my comp, and I'm going to overwrite the comp that I had before. So here we can see we're going to my desktop. Here's the render folder, and here's my comp. So we'll hit save, and yes, I want to replace that. So then let's go ahead and render this out. We're all set. We just render it. Bingo. So we got that done. Let's open up QuickTime and open up a file, and I want to render the movie I just made, or see the movie I just made. So here it is, and there's our audio. Okay, and we've got our movie. Let's do the movie comp. I can take and drag that into here, put that in my render queue. Same kind of thing. Let's walk through. These settings are fine. Lossless, there is no audio on the second one. So on CS6, you wouldn't click that. And over here, let's do it with my movie comp. We'll hit save. Yes, I want to replace that. Let's go ahead and render. So that renders out. It's done. And let's open up QuickTime. Open a file. My movie comp. Open that up, and here's the movie. So there you have it. we got a quick little render and made a couple of different animations and worked through setting things up in the layer panel, importing files, and rendering things out. So hopefully this at least get you started on setting up your own project, and we can go from there. So thanks again. Catch you later. Bye.